Servus, Matthias here, and today I'm bringing you a very special episode of Single Track. It's not every day you get to talk Mount Everest. Today I sit down with high-altitude mountaineer and explorer Andrew Hughes from Seattle. Growing up in the shadow of Mount Rainier, a climb to the summit made him fall in love with mountaineering, and a few years later he's climbed all the major peaks in the world. He's climbed the 7 summits and completed the Antarctica trifecta. And this year, he's on the way to the North Pole. There's so much to talk about and so little time. In this upcoming episode, I focus on Everest because, man, this is the mountain, the adventure. And I had to ask some questions. Also, this interview inspired me so much and reawakened my love for mountaineering that I did what I had to do as a designer. I designed a t-shirt. Brand new, my first new shirt for 2022, and now available in the store on my website. The first 10 to the top riffs off a popular shirt design and celebrates the first 10 men and the first 10 women who reached the summit of Mount Everest and made it down alive to tell the tale. Go check out the new Single Track shirt at singletrack.fm. And now let's hear from Andrew. Andrew, thank you for coming on Single Track. This is a super exciting show because I'm not talking to somebody who just runs, and I love talking to people who runs, but you've been to places that I, with my little running shorts, usually don't get to. So I'm super excited about this conversation. And Andrew, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So you are calling in now you're out of Seattle right now, right?
Yeah. Just over in the Montlake neighborhood, for those that know.
Yeah, perfect. So you grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so you've had this looming white ghost, Mount Rainier, always in your backyard. And at some point in your life, you decided to climb it, and from there you went on. Give us a quick snapshot of how it feels growing up in the shadow of the mountain and then at some point climbing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who is born in the Northwest or who's had the opportunity to come through here for whatever reason can't not have Rainier catch their eye, and for some catch their heart and interest to kind of explore it further. And for me, I grew up in a small Norwegian town kind of over across the Kitsap Peninsula called Paulsbo, less than 10,000 people, and grew up on a little farm. And so for me, the Olympic National Park was kind of my entry point into really getting out into the trails. But every time that I would hop a ferry from the Kitsap Peninsula over to Seattle, which would be a big day out for us, to the city, you would always hopefully catch that glimpse going across the Puget Sound of Rainier in the distance. And it just becomes part of your, I think, identity as a Northwesterner. You're just feeling this connection and draw. And for me, I could never find anybody to go climb with me, and I didn't have anybody in my community who I really connected with as a mountaineer or to someone to kind of mentor me and get me into the climbing world. So it was kind of just on a whim that I said, okay, if I keep waiting my entire life for somebody to invite me to go out there and teach me how to do it, this is never going to happen. And luckily, in the Northwest, we have some of the top guiding companies in the world, from Madison Mountaineering to Alpine Ascents, to Whitaker Mountaineering. So many legendary places and people that have kind of become, I think, funnels for that first experiential opportunity in the outdoors. So I signed up with Alpine Ascents, and I think for a lot of people, the proximity of the mountain sometimes makes you underestimate it, and how much it will demand of you. And yeah. I think in general, mountains in general that are easy to get to are sometimes the hardest, because we just think that these expeditions should be long, and if it takes longer to get to and a longer commitment of time, then that means the mountain should demand more respect. But every mountain should demand respect, because on any day that mountain can remind you who is actually permanent and who is impermanent in this world. Yeah. It wasn't like we were very fortunate, and we got to the summit on our attempt. I went with Alpine Ascents, and it was a great run program. But it was the whole process. I loved the training. I think I was getting to a point in my late 20s, early 30s where like, you know, the metabolism slows down and like you don't really have those natural organized sports and things, that you do growing up. And to find this like purpose to work towards was kind of one of the initial draws to it. And also just the community around it. And I'm sure like you have that as well with a lot of kind of the running community I know is super strong. And it's just finding that group of people to hold you accountable and kind of also inspire you. And I found that, and it's another learning opportunity. And so for some, the Rainier is enough. For me, it became really just the seed from which a lot of future kind of dreams were rooted.
I think you're describing your journey in a way that it echoes probably with a lot of people. I feel the same way. That's how I started running, and I started running around the same time than you did, right? You feel like your metabolism slows down. I did read an interesting factoid in a book which sort of gave me hope again. It's Bear Grylls' book on his Everest attempt.
Oh, yeah.
When he was saying that actually the average age when most people climb Everest is in their 50s. And, you know, I think probably partially that has something to do with available funds and midlife crisis, right? Being able to go to take that much time out. There's that aspect too. But there's the other aspect, which is that, as you're saying, when you grow up with organized sports, you have this belief that once you hit 25, your body's in decline and you can just throw yourself in a corner, and you really don't have to. You might not be able to compete on a playing field with somebody who is 18 and ready to throw everything away, but you can still perform at the highest level. Yeah. And so realizing that there was hope gives you a whole different sense of motivation, totally. Right?
And I think the journey changes too, because I think growing up, I played a lot of competitive sports, but it was always me against somebody else. And I think as you get older, you start to realize that like the greatest competitor that you ever had is yourself. Like you're like, and the greatest person to kind of like refine and work on is yourself, because I think we always look external for our own validation when it comes like we beat the other team and we win. But like at a certain point in time, like you have to find out what really you value. And that's what kind of, for me, it was like, hey, this is something that is, it's much more than just kind of like beating nature. And I think that's where I started at. I was like, oh, I conquered nature was the first. And then like the next mountain I tried to climb reminded me that you never conquer nature. Like you are simply invited into that realm, and that's it. And I think also like the other thing that like kind of has come over the years, which is why I think there's a lot more older mountaineers than younger, is that when you're younger, it's kind of humility isn't usually a gift given to the young. It's something that is gained through years and years of different experiences and opportunities to experience it. Mm-hmm. And I think with big, huge, long expeditions such as Everest, like you climb mountains much more with the mind than you ever do with the body. Mm-hmm. And because the body is always going to give far sooner. And even on Rainier, like it is much more of a mental undertaking. And endurance running is the same. I feel like there's an absolute physical component to it. You can't show up unprepared for it. But the body is going to call out to quit far before the mind. And so if you can like mentally and like have that spirit to call you to kind of push on, and you realize like where you actually are uncomfortable versus mm-hmm. where you are actually in danger of hurting yourself. And there's a big divide in that world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are already super deep into the psychology, and I love it. But I want to pull us out from there and go back to your timeline. So you climbed Rainier, you fell in love with mountaineering as a passion, as an activity, as a hobby, But then you went on. Give us a quick snapshot of it. I looked at your website and your list of mountains you climbed, and if we don't
Yeah.
have time to capture and cover every single one of them, but perhaps you can take us through that journey, because there is a level of commitment to say, okay, well, I sign up for Rainier, and then perhaps I'll do I don't know, Denali next or something. But I mean, you went on and climbed all of the major peaks.
Yeah, I mean, it became something where, again, like a lot of things in life, it was about timing. Like Rainier coincided with other like life things and professional things. I had a marriage that was coming apart, and then eventually, like, kind of serendipitously, like a month after I signed into Denali, like I signed my divorce papers, and so it's like one of these things, like sometimes in life things just kind of align to give you an opportunity to refine and reclaim yourself. And so I just was, and then my work I wasn't happy with. So I'm like, I'm going to change my life to kind of structure it where I can make enough money to be responsible and also be on the road and climb as much as possible. And I also was fortunate enough to meet very soon after Rainier. I was like, I need to learn more. Like, this is great, but I'm a bit of a junk show, like on the mountain, that first mountain. So I did a 6-day course up in the North Cascades, and actually met one of my dear friends and like climbing partner, who was from living in Colorado at the time. And we both kind of like chatted on the phones for back and forth, and she had a dream to do the 7 summits, as did I. And so we're like, okay, let's hold each other accountable. And we both climbed different ones of them already. And so we just kind of like started working towards it. And then we added also the volcanic 7 summits, and then we added the North and South Pole as well. So it's kind of been this opportunity to kind of hold each other kind of accountable, but also inspire and motivate each other. And we just went full in, and I went full in as well, and I climbed even more stuff. And so it just kind of started going to South America. And the 7 summits are Aconcagua in South America, Denali in North America. There's a debate between, there's 2 different lists, the Bass and the Metzner list.
Yeah.
Kosciuszko in Australia, Carsten's Pyramid in Indonesia. I did both just to make sure that I
Covered both of all your bases.
Cover both the bases. Yeah, absolutely. You got Everest in Asia, Elbrus for Europe, and then Kilimanjaro for Africa, and Mount Vincent in Antarctica. So kind of all over the place. But within 5.5 years, I was able to, and with some failed attempts as well, reach the summit of all of them with Everest this past year. And in between that, I climbed even more. Like I'd be in Europe and I would climb Mont Blanc, or I would be we were doing the volcanoes. We would end up going to Papua New Guinea and climbing Mount Gilaway, which has been climbed very rarely because it's just super remote and hard to get to and logistically put together. And just one of those things where you start realizing that the mountains also became an opportunity to like travel and see parts of the world that you would never see, and just the people you meet along that journey. It just, every mountain was kind of another solidifying of this path that I was on. And it's been an incredible several years, and so much has I feel been given to me by the opportunity to be on this road.
Yeah, I mean, in some respects, it becomes then not just a mountaineering challenge, it's also a logistical challenge, right? I mean, traveling to so many different places, visas and timing of season and being able, I mean, the amount of research that you have to do, because, I mean, this type of project, like to just do Everest, you could have just in the same way you signed up for your Rainier trip, you could have just signed up as a guiding trip. But the 7 Summit goes beyond a guiding tour where you can just book one after the other, right? I mean, REI Adventure Tours doesn't offer the seven summits in 2 years or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, like it's a huge feat. There have been like people that have been very fortunate to like set like speed records, but it is, the speed of the physical is definitely amazing. it is absolutely the logistical aspect though, and being fortunate enough to have the mountain actually grant you pass consecutively to do that, because there's tons of people that completely have the mental and physical ability to do it. The mountain just doesn't give them the weather window.
Yeah.
I mean, and that happens on so many occasions. And so like it is logistically extremely challenging, usually because some of these places are extremely remote. And even when you get to the mountain, to have the conditions aligned so you can actually like complete the climb, just it doesn't always happen. And I've been very fortunate like to have weather be a factor only a couple times in a failed summit.
Then in an environment where you're climbing and the amount of sacrifice you're giving, it's a lot different to come to a DNF conclusion. We as trail runners, we sign up for races too, and we might travel to the race and we might train for 6 months for it, and we pay entry fees and buy gear and stuff. But when you can't do it, you just can't do it. There's an aid station and you don't make the cutoff and you go back home with the tail between your legs. But when you climb in these environments, speaking of what you said very early on, humility and wisdom, you have to find a way of making that call yourself. There is no race director who tells you, the weather forecast doesn't look so great. You really shouldn't be climbing this right now, right? I mean, you need to have that.
I mean, that's totally. And I think like that's where, sadly, I think a lot of people that pass away on peaks, especially large peaks, it's because they're not listening to their own bodies, and they get the summit fever, and they essentially run their wheels off trying to get to the summit, realizing that's only half the climb. Like if you view the summit as the climb, then you're always going to put yourself in a perilous position, because the descent is where 85% or so of the injuries and deaths occur, because people just don't leave anything in the tank. And I think like going up the mountain, it's always about, I was always told early on by some great mentors that like you're not checking to see whether you have it within you to get up. It's like, if I turn around right now, can I get down? Like, that's what you're always looking to do as you go up. And so, I think like and on certain mountains, there is no evacs. I mean, there's cemeteries that are at the base of the mountains and memory stones, because people like don't realize that it's not like, falling in the park in Seattle and having like an ambulance come pick you up. Like, there's no cell service. There's no like emergency crew to come and swoop you. It becomes much more life or death. I mean, you're kind of like humility with yourself.
And at the same time, technology has gotten a lot better and therefore made these places a lot more accessible, right? I think that's a big aspect of what we see, why we're seeing the sport or this activity of mountaineering being pushed to new heights, the speed attempts and these aspects, right?
Yeah, I mean, I always lean back to like, I think it's Krakauer style, like there's no shortcuts to the top. Like, I think the part of it is you get this extremely like inspiring collection of new documentaries coming out and new stories and people doing phenomenal feats. And because the stories are more easily shared, they do kind of captivate and make people want to go off and do these things. The problem is, I think sometimes people don't realize that the people in these movies have done an incredible amount of work throughout their entire life to build up the bodies and the experience to climb these mountains. And Everest and really big mountains get a lot of people attracted to doing them because they're so noteworthy in kind of the media and different mediums and social media. But they require lots of other, usually like years of climbing experience to get yourself ready for that. And it's kind of like having the understanding that like to put yourself in the best position and be safe, you should probably find find a proper path, not the quickest path.
Yeah. I often say that to people who just come to me and say they want to climb Rainier and they don't have a lot of outdoor experience even. And I'm always like, look, there's so many mountains, there's so many trails. Knock yourself out. Go run up Mount Si. Check out Mount Eleanor.
Exactly.
Right? Enjoy the journey to get there. And A, you will learn the skill. B, you learn the humility and how you move yourself in this environment. And then also Rainier becomes then truly that trophy, because if you just skip all of the other parts and immediately let yourself get carried up to the summit of the highest mountain in the region, then what's next, right? What do you do then with your life?
Totally, yeah. And I've seen it happen before, sadly, where people have had people assist them and opportunities, and that's fine. That system might work for them for a while, but when there's a critical failure in that system, usually it's life or death. And sadly, I've seen people pass on mountains that they just had a system where they thought it was working because it had never been tested before on smaller, safer mountains, and they get in bigger environments, and those systems come apart, and someone loses their life.
Yeah.
And I think there is like if you like every little trail you climb, Mount Si, like that is part of that community and process. Like people that have climbed Rainier have done Si 20, 30 times with weighted packs on, and like you start realizing that there's this whole experiential connection that comes from doing mailbox, like old mailbox and light trail, and like in the Northwest, which is just like just for those who haven't done it, they absolutely should, because it's one of it's easy to get to and then really hard to do. But it's a classical like hike in this area that like anybody who's done it like feels connected, and you're just building up this bigger Northwestern kind of outdoor community every time you do a different trail or do a different mountain. And then Rainier, of course, is one that connects you to a whole group of people around the world.
Yeah. Of all of the incredible summits that you stood on, which one was your favorite? Which one do you treasure the most? And then which one was the hardest? And I don't know, could be the same.
Yeah. Honestly, Rainier, I think people have asked me, like, if you only can climb one mountain, like, be it it's their last mountain to climb, which one would it be? And I lean towards Rainier because it's the one that is most personal to me, and it's my hometown mountain, and it's the one where my passion really came into like being a part of my present life. So I think it's my favorite because it means the most to me. But it seems a bit cliche, but Everest is probably also extremely the most challenging and the one that took the most from me, only because I attempted it in 2019 and was on the summit push, and like we talked about earlier, I had to personally call my own number and say I wasn't going to go any further, because at 21,500 we were at Camp 2 and got stalled for weather, and I felt this thing in my lungs start to happen that I knew it wasn't right, because I climbed enough to know when things are good and when they are definitely not good. And I ended up having pneumonia and had to get evac off the mountain and spent days in a Kathmandu hospital and dropped 20 pounds. And so it's one of those things where, and then I had trained for it to go back again in 2020. And then a week before the pandemic started, and that stopped. And so, to go back in 2021, still with COVID being an issue and not knowing until like a week before whether we were even going to be able to get into Nepal, and then to navigate both the pandemic and all the other logistical issues, and to reach the summit where I actually proposed to my now fiance up there. She didn't know at the time, but like that is just an extremely a mountain that made me just appreciate the journey of climbing. And I think there's something extremely special about, like I always say, like for people that climb, I think they get it, and maybe it's for endurance. I think like there's certain runs, endurance runs, maybe like the Leadville 100 or things like that, where where they're just like a part. Is like they have a pedestal within the community,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, for me, it's more about a communion and like almost like this spiritual basis within climbing. And if you're Catholic, you go to the Vatican. If you're Muslim, you go to Mecca. For me, going to Everest is like paying homage and doing a pilgrimage, and so it just felt this amazing connection to something greater, a whole history of people that had been a part of that journey to climb that mountain, and that will climb it.
Yeah. Talk to me about Everest. I think you're the first person that I talked to with a little bit of time that actually climbed Everest. I remember meeting a guy once who I was interviewing for a land use opportunity here in Olympia. And just before the interview started, we were talking casually, and he said, "Oh yeah, I climbed Everest." And I was like, I really don't want to talk to you about the land use permits right here. I want to talk to you about Everest.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I know so much about the journey, and I think you're talking about this pilgrimage. I know the names of the other big summits, but I know nothing about it. But Everest, because of the media, has been so much in my mind. Perhaps the two pieces that I'm the most interested in is if you can describe the Khumbu icefall, because the pictures look so insane, and every mountaineer who climbs it speaks about it with such reverence and understanding, even though it is the lowest level, the lowest laying area. So it should be easy, but it's not. So talk to me about the navigation through that. And then I want to talk about the death zone.
Yeah, I mean, so the Khumbu, it's the gate though, and that's the thing. I always think of like Greek mythology, kind of going into Hades and having like the three-headed dog sitting there. Like that is essentially what the Khumbu becomes. It's this thing that is living and is always on the verge of kind of breaking off and consuming you. It's like, and yet it is so beautiful. It's like a Salvador Dali ice sculpture. It is this surrealist space of calving ice and crevasses, and it's always changing. So from the first time you go through it, the route is never exactly the same because there's ice falls and things collapsing, and it is the most dangerous spot. To be fair, like once you get through the Khumbu, there are dangers, but it is the ice fall where you are most at risk of dying, and things are most out of your control. Like the rest of the mountain, you can kind of control yourself, and there are risks, but it's really that initial kind of exit. And base camp sits on the moraine right outside the Khumbu ice falls, and so you have to go through it 6 times, 3 up and 3 down. And so you're just kind of always kind of trying to go as fast speed as safety in there. But it is a place that I think really bonds a lot of climbers, because there's just an inherent risk with every time you walk into it. And you just have to there's avalanches coming, and sometimes you'll go along and you'll see the rope because it's fixed line. The icefall doctors are just, what they do is immeasurably important to every person who passes through. They're always up there like fixing the route and laying the ladders, and it's not without them that any of our dreams could ever come through getting that, finding our route through there. But even with all their work, there'll be like times you'll head off, and all of a sudden the rope disappears and you realize there was a huge ice collapse within the last hour or so. And you're realizing that's the margin of error right there, like, and timing is that, if you had left an hour earlier from camp, like you and your team would be gone. And so there are these reminders as you go through, or there'll be like an avalanche coming down, and you can't run away from it. So you're just sitting there and hoping that it doesn't you don't know how much power it has coming down, whether it's going to take you off. And so, it is, I think it's one of the most special places to be. And it is incredibly fun and adventurous, but it also, I think, just deserves the utmost respect because, I would never change. Because they've talked about with technology and the ability to potentially one day fly people over the Khumbu to reduce the risk. But I think that it would be like flying you up to the summit of Rainier and being like, yeah, you've been on the mountaintop, but you haven't really climbed the mountain. And I kind of feel like, despite the risk, the Khumbu is what makes the Everest climb from the Nepalese side. And if you don't want to do the Khumbu, you can always go to the Tibetan side and climb kind of up on the other side of the mountain as well. So.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I remember in the early stories where helicopters couldn't fly very high, and you see helicopters now flying higher and higher. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting how you describe it and describe the journey and how important yet immensely dangerous it is. But yeah, the idea of just completely circumnavigating it. I don't know, in Europe you build gondolas, right? But you usually have gondolas not over the most dangerous areas, right? You sort of do it because you have the mundane and the boring stuff a little bit, right? And so you can perhaps from a mountaineering point of view, from an athletic point of view, you could potentially justify saying, okay, I'll take a gondola for the first of the third because it's just forest roads and stuff. And so it doesn't really, but here you would be taking an aspect of the climb out that really
it's the most technical aspect of the climb. I mean, the rest of it is classic mountaineering slogging. I mean, you're doing some rappelling, but like when you're in the ice falls, that is when you're basically, because you're going so fast, you're just doing like, high exposure maneuvering and climbing, and that, like, after that, you're just kind of got to be able to suffer through and slog along. So if you take that out, then it's really, I think you lower the bar as to what is asked of you to climb Everest. And also, like, even with technology, like, weather and climate change is creating such dramatic like shifts in kind of what the weather window is and what the weather of Everest is. Even in the last few years, it's changed so dramatically. You're having substantially stronger storms coming off from like the Bay of Bengal and stuff like that, and cyclones that are converging on the mountain. And it's still a place where, I mean, base camp's at 17,500. Camp 1, which is on the other side of the Khumbu Ice Falls, is around like 19,000 feet. About 1,500 feet is extremely hard for helicopters, and there's no reliance. And so I think when you start, again, lowering the bar at which people can access a mountain, you start thinking that you're safe when you're relying on technology. And if all of a sudden something goes wrong for somebody who doesn't know how to climb and they have to climb out through the Khumbu and they don't know how to do that because they helicoptered in, all of a sudden, like, you're increasing actually the risk versus reducing it.
Well, and given the amount of people on the upper part of the mountain, I don't really think we need any more people to get easier access, right? A pilgrimage isn't supposed to be easy. Like, it's supposed to be something where you're appreciating the steps that get you to that place of reverence. So. All right. Speak to me about this unspeakable place. I'm trying to figure out how you can describe. I mean, you on one side you already said that the rest is reasonable, easy, high mountaineering, meaning you're just slogging your body up. It's not technical as ice rock climbing the way you would encounter K2 or so. But how can you describe what happens up there to somebody who's never been in a place like that?
I think I think the technicality of like classical climbing that you would do changes because altitude itself becomes its own technicality, and that becomes the extreme kind of adversary that you're dealing with up there. The higher you go, the more your body demands of you just to function. And so but at the same time, you actually kind of, usually a lot of people lose their appetites and have a harder time intaking because your body's just kind of cannibalizing itself for energy. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting weaker, and every step is labored. There's just nothing that's easy when you get up there. And I had somebody the other day ask me, like, why does it look like everyone's moving so slow or not moving at all when I see them on Everest? And it's primarily because it's, I mean, on the descent, you're gaining more oxygen and you have gravity. When you're going up and you're carrying heavy packs and your gear and your food that you're going to use, and it's honestly a breath to a step. It's like moving underwater sometimes. Like and the death zone itself is just, you get up there and everything slows down. Everything takes more time. Everything is effort. Everything is hard. Going to the bathroom is hard. Eating food is hard. There's nothing easy up there. And I think there's this huge misinterpretation that, like, you're just getting dragged up there. And some people do. Like, you see people that potentially have, been fortunate and had people like short rope them up the mountain. But for most everybody else, you kind of meet up there, they've worked for it and they're putting it in, and you see them kind of suffering through. And it's, as you get higher on the mountain, I mean, you're just seeing kind of people kind of coming apart usually. It's there's, especially when you get to kind of Camp 4 and above. Camp 4 for me is kind of a very haunting place. There's just the remnants of a lot of tents and expeditions, because it's just barren space where, there are still bodies from people that can't get down the mountain, that are resting there for the time. And there's just these kind of skeleton remnants of tents that are just kind of flapping and ripping in the wind, and there's not really it's just a place that you don't want to be for very long, which is just this incredible contrast from the beauty of Everest itself and the Himalayas. And I think that's one of those things where it's just you kind of appreciate kind of the opportunity to be there, but you don't want to, you realize it's not where you were ever meant to remain.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating finding words for a place like that, and as you're saying, you don't want to spend a lot of time, but on the other side, it's alluring, and you wanted to achieve that. You wanted to be up there, right? Because obviously, well, why are you up there? Why do people up there?
Absolutely.
Yet people take themselves to these places and leave something of themselves up there, but then also able to take something down.
Well.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. It's like I would never exchange that experience. It's one of the most valuable experiences that I feel I've ever gained, because it's something that I had to give so much of myself to have. I had to work for months to be able to get there, years to get there, and to that moment. And so, despite it's kind of always this idea of like redefining your relationship with discomfort, and for me, like, you just kind of, you find the gratitude gained within that pain and suffering that exists sometimes in these places. And you realize that, like, we call like type 2 fun, like, it feels like death while you're doing it, but the moment it's over, like, it turns into this like blissful kind of long form memory that you cherish.
Yeah. I thank you. I think it was the tone in your voice that explained to me a little bit more what it is to be up there, because it is so hard to put it into words, and in some respects, we've seen the photos, we've heard people describe these places before, right? But being able to ask you this question and you drawing from your own experience and just sort of stepping back into this moment, I think gave away, and I hope our listeners feel this too, that this place is a place where in some respects you don't want to be in on the other side. You chose to be, and it is something that you actively put yourself into. I mean, people experience trauma and it's hard to retell the story, but you wanted to be up there. So it's a completely different journey in and out.
Yeah, and that's the thing I try to explain. Like, I never seeking sympathy for being there. Like, this is a self-sought path. Mm-hmm. For me, it's something that I think that you continue to process, and I think that's partially because you're so oxygen deprived when you're up there as well. Like your mind and your body and everything kind of feels like a bit of a dream state, and the fatigue and everything else. And I mean, the last 11 days on our summit push, I think I lost 15 pounds of body weight. I lost like 25 pounds overall during the expedition. So like you're going through this extreme state of like physical change, which impacts your mental and emotional changes or states. But it also just opens you up. And I think that's the thing, is that it opens you up and you become extremely vulnerable, and the people you're sharing your tent with and this expedition with, I mean, it's, for me, such an emotional experience. And I mean, I think a lot of our time in our day-to-day lives, we like have a lot of walls that are up for protection. And those walls just get torn down up there. There's no energy to like hold them up. Yeah. And so you just become a much more vulnerable, open person, and you allow the opportunity to love the people you're with and find such an immense amount of gratitude again for them and for that experience. So. Yeah.
No, and it's a fantastic, and I think it's at the heart of what I love about our sport. When you think of the history of mountaineering, that it came from, well, I mean, yes, there was colonialism and exploration and trying to be the first country to put a flag into a particular place. But the individual people who actually went out to do this, who weren't just after a land grab or searching for resources, they did it out of a place of fortune and prosperity. They had a place of peace and willingness to sort of stretch themselves physically, not just psychologically or philosophically, right? And I think it's great that we as humans are able to encounter this, because in some respects, sometimes we talk about these kind of experiences, as I mentioned, sort of out of drama, right? We experience war zones or something, and it's nice to be able to take ourselves into these places and stretch ourselves and be better, live better lives.
I totally agree. And I think that's why a lot of people, like, there's a lot of like great programming with like people that have gone through trauma, or like the Wounded Warriors Project that actually helps people go and do these climbs, because I think like there's something about like bringing it back to Rainier, and I always say this, like once you climb Rainier and it's down on the summit, when you're having a day where you're doubting yourself, all you need to do is look to the horizon, and you're reminded of your potential and what you're capable of doing. And they're like these things, like these mountains we climb in nature become also opportunities and to source strength from for when we're climbing all the other mountains in our lives that have nothing to do with climbing in the natural world. So, and we're all drawn to it. I'm sure you see this as running as well. People are drawn to like endurance running and climbing for different reasons. Sometimes it's the health benefits. Sometimes it is a healing, like whether they're coming back from addiction or other trauma, and they're looking for something, um, and they often find it in kind of endurance sports like these. There's something extremely healing and strengthening about them that goes beyond the physical.
Yeah, and so so freeing to be able to spend a few days, weeks, to spend a block of our lives, if you will, to sort of block everything else out, where the rest of our lives is juggling hundreds of priorities. And when we're doing these adventures, we are able to sort of really focus in on these few pieces that demand our attention and really absolutely nothing else, right?
So yeah, you detach to reattach. So it's just the thing. It's just like you kind of like there's so many things that tether us day to day that we think are truly need to be focused on and dealt with. And then you get out there and you kind of have time to like see things for what they really are and what's really important and really where you want to invest your time. And I think like going away has only deepened my relationships with the people I love and care about at home, has like clarified the courses that I want to invest myself into professionally. And I think that's kind of like why you leave sometimes is to arrive at where you're supposed to actually be.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. So now it is the beginning of 2022, and you've got more plans. Tell us a little bit about how you've stood on the highest peak and done so much already. But where do you go next?
Yeah, so one of the original goals was to complete the Explorers Grand Slam, which is completing the 7 summits and then reaching for both the North and the South Pole. There's those that have done the full Explorers Grand Slam. There's like 20 people who have gone like full traverses. Unfortunately, with the North Pole, that's almost become, because of climate change, impossible to do. But the last degree, which is essentially completing from the 89th to the 90th degree, which is something about 111 nautical miles, I think, as the crow flies. But that's my next expedition. I've already reached the South Pole. So the hope is to reach the North Pole, which hasn't actually been possible for the last 3 years because of COVID and other logistical issues. So if I'm able to reach that, I'll leave in late March and hopefully arrive at the North Pole kind of about mid-April. I'll be, I think, around the 70th person ever to do that, and I think like the 19th American to ever do that. And then doing some other climbing down to Mexico after that, and hoping to probably look at some expeditions, a couple world record attempts on kind of a hybrid of mountaineering and some other kind of other disciplines down in South America in early 2023. So those are kind of the things that are on the radar right now. Of course, trying to squeeze in whatever I can in between, maybe get over and climb the Matterhorn or something like that. But also getting married this year, which is a whole different expedition of love and partnership. And so have to definitely want to be, again, present for that entire experience. So.
Yes. I was just at the foot of the Matterhorn this summer for the first time, and
it's iconic.
It is unbelievable. It is unbelievable.
Yeah.
You come around the corner, you drive up this valley, and you see this mountain, and you're like, it is. I've seen the videos. I do not do well with exposed areas, and I don't think I can ever do that summit ridge.
Yeah.
But
it's pretty gnarly. It's just such an iconic mountain for me. Like anything you talked about earlier, the history of mountaineering, and there was a huge nationalistic aspect to it. But then you have a lot of the people, I mean, throughout history have held such kind of poetic relationships with the mountains and climbing, and it has been this communing with nature in a different way. And I think that there are some amazing climbers and artists at the beginning of Alps climbing that I love to kind of dive into every now and then, because they're just, the Matterhorn is one of those mountains that
Walking through
Yeah.
downtown Zermatt and seeing
Mhm.
all of these statues of climbers who sort of had their beginning and had sort of the sort of cradle of mountaineering and of these adventure attempts is breathtaking. So just walking through town makes me want to reconsider and say, well, I gotta climb it at some point.
It's very much like Rainier. It's just there are certain mountains when you see them, you just are drawn to them. Like Ama de Blanc in Nepal, it's substantially shorter than the 8,000 meter peaks that surround it, but it's one of those mountains where you're trekking up to Everest Base Camp, one of the first large mountains you see, and it just calls to you. And it's just like Rainier, and the Matterhorn has that same kind of feel to it. It's just especially when you see it in person, you just feel that draw, and you understand why people generations ago saw those mountains and were called to them as well, to see if they could reach its peak.
Indeed. Amazing. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Let people know how they can follow your adventures and journey.
Yes, I mean, like social media-wise, I primarily use Instagram just because of the platform itself, but also have TikTok. Both of those are at Andrew_I_Hughes. And there, if you go to the website at Andrew, I think it's or the website andrewfitshughes.com or andrewhughes.com. I should know that, but I think if you reach out to me, I'm always available to kind of chat with mountains and help people direct their own path of how they began. I do that a lot with people that are just have never climbed or have wanted to climb, because I think part of the gift of being able to do what I've done is to help people also get out there and enjoy it. I think breaking down barriers of accessibility that have stood for different people for different reasons is kind of the next expedition of my life, or what I want to do the rest of my life is just help people create that relationship and find that opportunity, as I found several years ago with Rainier.
Yeah.
So
I love it. We'll have links to everything that you mentioned in the show notes, so people can just easily click on it and get in contact with you.
Feel free to reach out. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for the opportunity, and wish you all the best.
Inspired much? Don't forget to check out the new Single Track t-shirt, First 10 to the Top, at singletrack.fm/store.